Welcome food fans, picky eaters, the flavor curious, and everyone in between. Nothing makes good food better than good conversation. And your table is ready. Come right this way to the Food for Thoughtcast with your host, Melissa Reagan. But you can call her Chef. All right, let's get this episode started.
As a chef and a person who loves all kinds of food, I'm always looking for ways that I can emphasize quality over quantity without feeling like I'm missing out or depriving myself of the things that I love. And I love pasta. Carbonara, mac and cheese, primavera, cacio e pepe, you name it and I'm all about it. That's why I choose Banza. Banza is the pasta made from chickpeas, which means it has more protein, more fiber, and I believe more flavor than regular old pasta. Seriously, if you go in my pantry right now, there are 2 boxes in there awaiting their next culinary adventure. Banza has over 12 different kinds of pasta, including penne, rotini, elbows, and cavatappi, which is my favorite, because all of those curves and ridges hold even more delicious sauce. Banza also makes pizza crust, which tastes too good to believe that it comes from peas. You can find Banza at Whole Foods, Target, and Walmart. Hey there, food fans. Welcome back to the Food for Thoughtcast with me, your host, Melissa Reagan, but you can call me Chef. Today's episode is titled Cruise Food, and I would like to take this opportunity to review and recap the food and everything that I tried and tasted on my recent trip to Cozumel via Carnival Breeze. We sailed out of Galveston and spent 8 hours in Cozumel, and then the rest of the trip were days at sea. If you've ever been on a cruise before, you know that there are a myriad of food options available to you, including room service, buffet style, counter service, usually a couple bars and pubs, and there's typically 2 or 3 sit-down options. Now, my only experience is with Carnival Cruises. I've yet to try any other cruise line, but I do hear stories and tips and read different information about the food that's available and the quality, and people will make comparisons. But for the purposes of today's episode, I'm just going to talk about what my experience was on the Carnival Breeze. I approach every vacation very much in chef mode. I kind of can't turn it off. And so I just want to give you a little bit of, an inside look into what I ate and everything that I encountered while I was gone. So let's get right into it. I left on a Thursday afternoon. Our ship took off at 3 p.m. from Galveston. It was hot and sunny. Typically on a Carnival cruise, they will design the menus in the sit-down restaurants to have a little bit of local flair depending on what port you're in. So in Galveston, for example, you might get a shrimp option on the menu, it might be more seafood heavy fare since, you're right on the coastline. And especially in a place like Galveston, you're going to have maybe some Texas flavors, some more Texas influences. So there were some pico de gallo, options on the menu. There were a couple of fresh salsas. I chose to sit in the Sapphire Room. It's one of 2 sit down kind of casual to mid-casual dining options on the ship. They divide the dining rooms up depending on which room that you're staying in. So for example, if you're in the, 1,000s to 6,000s, you might eat at one restaurant. And if you're in the 7,000s and up, you might eat in the other. It's just an easy way to divide the labor. They have a galley that runs the center of most ships, and then they'll have dining rooms at either end. So in this particular dining room, the Sapphire Room, they had 2 bread options. One of the things that Carnival is trying to do on its ships nowadays is limit food waste, and it's really focusing on sustainability, recycling, etc. In the dining room, there used to be 3 or 4 bread options, and they would bring you a basket. These days, they'll have 1 or 2 options, and they'll bring it to you and ask you which one you would like, or if you would like both. This just cuts down on the food that's left on tables, and honestly, I think it's really smart for their cost and overhead as well. So on Thursday night, My two bread choices were a whole wheat and cranberry loaf. It was seeded. It was like a tiny little loaf of bread. They were kind of cute. And then the other option was what I would refer to as a pistolette, or it's like a miniature baguette, except that it's kind of pointed and tapered at both ends, more like a crescent roll. So I chose the whole wheat bread. It was actually kind of hard. It was just a little bit stale. It was kind of disappointing. For my first course, I chose a Caesar salad. Now, Carnival, if you've ever cruised with them before, they used to have a kale and Caesar salad option on the menu, which I really love. I love a dark leafy green to balance out the texture of romaine so that it's not only one texture. I really, really value variety and interesting textures all together in a dish. So all that being said, this was still a really nice Caesar salad. The croutons were very fresh. There was plenty of freshly grated Parmesan cheese on top. At the end of the day, it was really nothing spectacular, but it was welcome nonetheless because I was starving. Now, one of the first course options they had was a poblano and corn soup. And I was very excited about this, but unfortunately, it was so spicy that it was nearly inedible. Poblano is not even one of the hottest chilies. If you're looking at like the Scoville units, for example, they can be on the spicy side, though. It's just like any other chili, varying degrees of spice depending on the time it was picked, how ripe it is, how large it's grown, et cetera, et cetera. But this soup was incredibly spicy to the point I couldn't enjoy it. Now, I like spicy food, and sometimes I'll seek it out on purpose. Sometimes I'm in the mood for ghost pepper, and sometimes I'm not. And sometimes I'm in the mood for something more mild, like hatch or jalapenos. Sometimes I like to turn it all the way up to 11. But the deal with spicy food for me is that it needs to have some sort of limiting factor and some sort of accompaniment that's going to elevate the flavor and not just accentuate the spiciness. I love spicy food, but it needs to have an acid or an umami element, or it needs to have other flavors with it where it's not just heat, that you're tasting. This soup was trying to injure me with every bite. So I only ate about half of the bowl. So I had this poblano corn soup. I had a Caesar salad. I started off with also a shrimp cocktail. Really nothing to write home about here. Although I did like the addition of the freshly grated horseradish on top of the cocktail sauce. I thought that was like a really classy and elevated way, to present this dish. It just made it a little bit more special than something I feel like you'd find in just a regular restaurant. I moved on to the entree selections. Nothing really thrilling about the options on the menu for this Thursday evening. It does take a few days to get into some of the higher priced items or some of the more interesting items. That first night, a lot of people are just eating tacos, burgers, or grilled chicken, or they might be going through the buffet. Everybody's kind of getting settled into the ship. There's always options that are available around the traditional meal time. So I had what is known as your time dining, which is you could show up anytime between 5:30 and 9 instead of picking a dining slot. I really just shun a traditional itinerary when I travel. I think it's partly due to the fact that I don't eat meals at regular intervals due to my job anyway. So I don't like to force that kind of scheduling on myself on vacation when I'm trying to relax. So of course there's 24-hour ice cream available on these Carnival cruises. They have pizza that's available from 11 a.m. Actually, I believe it's 9 a.m. to 3 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. And then they also have a Blue Iguana taco bar that's a little bit like a Chipotle. You can get a large burrito. You tell them everything that you want in it. It's really good. They always have fresh ingredients and a variety. Or they have Guy's Burger. So Guy Fieri from the Food Network, they've got Guy's Burger on these Carnival ships, and you can get all sort of options, but I digress. So on the first night, I wanted to keep it low key. I didn't want to wait in line for anything because I had just been on the road all day trying to get there. And I just wanted to be seated and served. As terrible as that sounds, sometimes you just don't want to work that hard for it. So shrimp cocktail, soup, and a Caesar salad. Because this food is included, of course, I like to try a little bit of everything. And I'm probably prone to eat more than I would at home because I'm not having to pay per item. The entree that I chose from that evening's menu was the mahi mahi with a pumpkin, tomato, and okra stew. Now, I'm not a fan of pumpkin per se, but I always look at a vacation as an opportunity to try new things. And I really feel like if you try a food in a new setting, in a different preparation, in a different combination. Even if your intent isn't to end up liking it, you can still say for sure that you 100% don't like it, but you can know that you've tried everything that you could, right? And maybe you're opening yourself up to a new experience, and maybe you'll start liking it, an item, because you're getting to experience it in a different way. I loved this. I absolutely can't stand pumpkin on its own. I think it's a very bitter gourd, and I don't see the appeal. Now, if you put it in a pie and there's about a half a tub of Cool Whip on top of it, about every other year I will get a wild hair and decide that I need a very thin slice of pumpkin pie engulfed and hidden in an entire mound of Cool Whip. Other than that, I'm not a fan. Pumpkin spice is a flavor that I don't care for. Pumpkin cake, pumpkin bread. I'm like, everybody else, can have that, and you guys can take my basic white girl card away. That's fine. It doesn't matter. But in this application, it was really delicious. It was actually chunks of pumpkin that it appeared had been steamed and then roasted. If you were listening to episode 16, I can tell you that it was parboiled, right? Shocked, blanched, parboiled, blanched, shocked in ice water to stop the cooking process. Most likely it was tossed in a fat or an oil of some kind and roasted until it was really nice caramelized brown. So it brought out all the great elements about a gourd or a squash, right? Because they have natural sugars. And so when you're caramelizing that item, you're bringing all those natural sugars to play. There was a tomato and okra stew. The okra appeared to have been previously frozen, but I'm totally fine with that because it limits the sliminess. The mahi-mahi, it tasted a little bit fishy. It's really not a fish that I eat that often anyway. It just seemed to be the most appealing and interesting thing on the menu that night. Overall, I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't hate it. And I'm giving a generous score because the pumpkin and tomato and okra stew played really well against that flavor, and it kind of mellowed out that fishiness. There was a lot of interesting things going on in there. There was cinnamon, there was cumin. I tasted a little bit of allspice. It was definitely a little bit of a Caribbean flair, and overall, I really enjoyed it. For breakfast the next day, I ate off of the buffet. They have a large variety of items that you can get. They also have like an early and a late buffet. So if you're a person who likes to sleep in on vacation, you still have options. Now, most Carnival dining rooms divide their buffets into 2 different halves of kind of the same shared space. So in other words, you might have 2 lines, but they match. And sometimes the differences are, really minimal. So if you go to the line that's, say, toward the front of the ship, you might have diced fruit. And on the line that's, toward the back of the ship, you might have sliced fruit. Those are some of the differences. You might have oatmeal on one side and maybe like grits on the other. So I went through the line that was advertising continental breakfast, and I had my options of scrambled eggs, sausage links, sausage patties, eggs Benedict, sliced ham, and then kind of a very British offering: roasted tomatoes, roasted mushrooms, baked beans in a sweet sauce, some different kinds of sausages, sliced cantaloupe, sliced honeydew. And the odd thing is, they'll put all these items on the cold side. Usually they have a couple of cold cuts next to the fruit. So if you're wanting to build, say, kind of more of a European style continental breakfast, they'll have like salami or mortadella or ham or turkey, and they'll have sliced cold fruit. Maybe on one side you'll get cottage cheese, and maybe on the other side you'll get a bread component. And some mornings they had pancakes or French toast. I didn't have anything bad, but the thing about it is one of the odd things about the cruise ships is that, of course, because they're buying in bulk and their home port is probably not in the United States, some of the items are a lot different than what you would get home. So the milk, for one, if you go through the line where they have the cereal bar, they're going to get like 7 or 8 options for dry cereal, which I didn't partake in because to me, when I'm on vacation, I'm like, yeah, I can have cereal at home. This is fine. But I've paid money to be here. So I try to limit the food experiences to things that I can't get at home if possible. I'll always use travel as a way, I won't say excuse, but as an opportunity to expand my palate when I can. But the milk that goes with the cereal, not super cold. but shelf stable pasteurized. So like what you might find in a European country, that you're going to see it on the shelf next to bread in the supermarket as opposed to refrigerated, just because it's a different kind. And not only that, but they'll have some interesting yogurt flavors, and the yogurt will be, one day it'll be a little bit thicker, like an Icelandic or Greek style, and then one day it'll be a little bit thinner, depending on the brand that they put out there. On this cruise was something I had never seen before. They had all the yogurt was in bulk. Typically, it's in single serve containers. And I was a little bit surprised that, kind of coming out of the back half of COVID, that there weren't more single serving containers. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But the banana was really good. The peach was good. I am a plain yogurt gal myself. Somewhere along the way, I decided to stop trying to eat so much sugar. So I switched from sweet tea, for example, to unsweet, and convinced myself that I like it, when really I've just gotten used to it and tolerate it. I don't really like it that much, but here we are for whatever reason. And then it was kind of the same with yogurt. I just started trying to eat the plain in an effort to eat less sugar. And now I prefer the plain, because you can really train your taste buds in this way. And it works the other way too. The more sugar you eat, the more sugar you will like, and the more sugar you will want, because it stimulates the same pleasure center in your brain. And then it works the reverse way, right? The more spicy food you eat, the more that you can build up a tolerance for it, et cetera, et cetera. It applies to so many things. All that being said, my breakfast was fantastic. One of the odd things is that they do keep the hard-boiled eggs on a hot plate, so they're warm. And it's kind of jarring to me, because as a kid growing up in the United States, I didn't eat warm, hard-boiled eggs. Now, as I got older and got into the industry, poached eggs are kind of close, like what you would get on an Eggs Benedict, but, I didn't really start seeing like a warm soft-boiled egg or like a warm 6-minute egg until I was into my 20s and 30s. And it's just not a texture that I enjoy. And actually thinking about it right now is kind of grossing me out. But yeah, I want a chilled, cold, hard-boiled egg with a little salt on it. And I want it sliced up into a Cobb salad. And it's something, the longer you hold a hard-boiled egg hot, it's just going to turn into a rubber ball. So it's just going to turn into a rubber bouncy ball with the texture of a rubber band. Really not a fan, but hey, to each his own. Like, there were plenty of people eating them, and if they enjoyed them, then that makes me happy, because, at the end of the day, like, we're eating good food. Everybody's going to find something that they want. It's kind of the beauty of a cruise, is that there's so many options there. You really can't go wrong. You just need to know what you like and where to find it. So that was Friday morning. Friday afternoon, I got to try a new restaurant I had never tried aboard a Carnival ship. So I was on the Carnival Breeze. One of the features of the Carnival Breeze is that on deck 5, on one of the lanai decks, they have Pig and Anchor, which is Guy Fieri's barbecue concept for Carnival. I tried every single thing on the menu, and it didn't really seem to phase the buffet attendant at all. This is kind of a counter service where you grab a plate and you hand it to them as you tell them what you want. The line moved very fast. I actually ate this 4 times in the 5 days that I was on the cruise, because it was really delicious. I tried a little bit of everything. The pulled pork was amazing. It was a little bit bland, but the smoke and the texture of the meat and kind of the mixture of the bark and the fat and the meat were really right on. I also had the chopped brisket. At one point, I had taken an order from there and put scrambled eggs on top of it from the buffet. I highly recommend that. If you've never had that combination or never had brisket in an omelet or a breakfast taco, you're really missing out. So put that on your list if it's something that you haven't tried. There were 4 sauces available. They had a Carolina sauce, which is my favorite. This iteration of a Carolina sauce was excellent. I could tell that it had Dijon mustard in it, and there were also big specks of cracked black pepper and a lot of red wine vinegar, and it was really delicious. The Memphis sauce was just a little sweet for my liking, but I understand why people like it. And as far as Memphis sauce goes, it was really well made. The Sriracha barbecue sauce was a little sweet, but it was good for what it was. It did have the heat to balance it out. The other sauce was just a standard run-of-the-mill barbecue sauce. I can't remember what it was called. I don't think it was based on a specific style, but yeah, you had Carolina, you had Sriracha, and you had Memphis. The 4th one, I will say, it tasted like it had a lot of liquid smoke in it, and that's just really not my bag. I didn't like it as much. The chicken was okay. Really, I'm a stickler when it comes to smoked chicken, and I just feel like a lot of people get it wrong. And I really feel like it's a crapshoot for wherever you are. There was also sausage, and they had regular and they had jalapeno, but only 2 of the 4 days that I ate at Pig and Anchor, they had this available. So I don't know if they just kind of had like trouble getting product or what the deal was. I will say the collard greens with smoked turkey were some of the best collard greens I have ever had. One of the bar that I set for collard greens is pretty high. I feel like what determines whether they're good or not is what you need to add to them or what you don't need to add to them. So a lot of people who eat greens, collard greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, like to add the Trappy's, vinegar with the little sport peppers in it. I think that's all well and good, but to me, the dish needs to be ready to be eaten when it gets to the table. So I have some pretty specific opinions about greens, and one of them is that you should add the spice and acid components after the greens are tender so that the juice flavors the greens. There was no shortage of flavor in these greens. These were absolutely incredible. They didn't need anything. They were seasoned perfectly. They had a little hint of spice. They definitely had some vinegar and a little bit of acid. They were really good, and I think I ended up eating my weight in them over 5 days. Mac and cheese was just standard, kind of mass produced. To be quite honest, it probably, was Velveeta. That's really no shade on Guy Fieri. Like, if Carnival is taking your concept and they're having to mass produce it, I understand, and especially as a chef, what it's going to take to produce things at volume. Hey, it didn't keep me from eating 3 servings of it, but I'm just going to say, did it blow my mind? No. Was it good mac and cheese? Yes. Very standard though, very stovetop. This wasn't baked. There were no breadcrumbs. There was nothing like that. There was no crunchy topping. And I'm kind of like a corners and edges gal when it comes to macaroni and cheese. Lasagna, I want that corner piece with the little crispy burnt on bits, bacon. I like it real crispy. And that goes for mac and cheese too. I like a little variety in there. So it's something that's going to keep it interesting and dynamic. Coleslaw, I could go either way on this, right? I like a vinegary, acidic, coleslaw that doesn't have any mayonnaise. And I like more of a Southern style, a Texas style coleslaw sauce that has mayonnaise and sugar and a little bit of vinegar. This one was actually a little bit strange. It either had fennel seeds and caraway or poppy seeds or some mixture of the 3. These were the flavors that I was getting. It was strange and it wasn't sweet enough. So a few points off there. The bread, even though I got there 10 minutes after it opened, basically 3 out of the 4 days, and then 30 minutes after it opened, the 4th time that I ate it, the bread was just hard as a rock. I'm not quite sure if they weren't storing it correctly, if it was stale before they toasted, or what was going on. But it's just, I swear I probably could have broken a window with it. That was really the only low point of the meal. Would I eat this again? 100%. Would I recommend it to somebody else? Absolutely. I like a lot of different types of barbecue. And if you're going to be on a vacation at sea and you want a little bit of taste of the States, I think this is a great addition to anybody's trip on a Carnival ship. If you're on a Carnival ship that has this and offers it, yeah, knock yourself out. Really, really, really good. So like I said, Carnival ships usually have a Blue Iguana taco bar. The ingredients are super fresh. And then a few feet from where you're standing in line for tacos and burritos, they have a salsa bar that usually has some watermelon slices on it. Also, that you can get as an optional side. Of course, the closer you are to the Caribbean or the Bahamas or, just on the ship itself, the fruit's going to be fresh and fresher and abundant. And so the watermelon was kicking every single time that I got it. Sometimes it's hard to find a good watermelon here, depending on the time of year it is and where it was grown, especially with all the rain we've had around the country. A lot of crops have been in poor quality this year with the rain and the drought and everything else that's going on. And so I have to really give it to the ships. They're sourcing the best things that they can find. So at the Blue Iguana, you have options of chicken and beef and shrimp. You can actually see them cooking the proteins right in front of you. There's a plancha or like a flat top right behind the cooks who are working kind of that mass production line that's facing the guest. I love this concept. They also have breakfast burritos available in the morning. I ate here 3 times on my trip because throw out all the rules. You're on vacation. If you want to eat 5 meals in a day, more power to you. And if you need 3 lunches one day, I'm not going to judge you. Blue Iguana Taco Bar, always a good choice. There was one day where I had pizza. They have a little concept. It's typically on the back of the ship near the aft pool at the back of the ship. It's usually on the Lido deck. On most Carnival ships, it's going to be called Pizza Pirate. They have pizza for nearly 24 hours a day. I believe it's open until 3 a.m. They shut it down to clean and obviously restock. A couple of times in the past, I've had a hard time getting there when pizza is available. Not this time. Every single time I walked by it, there was hot and fresh pizza. I preferred the fungi pizza, or it's like a 4 mushroom, mushrooms in Italian, fungus. You see where I'm going with that? It was excellent. The crust was a little bit chewy, but I totally get it with the amount of humidity you're dealing with being in the middle of the ocean. I mean, some of the things are going to work differently. It's no different than if you went to a ski resort. Items that at a higher altitude are going to be cooked differently, and they're going to taste different, and the air is thinner. Well, you have to think about it the other direction when you're eating things that are at sea. Basically, they're cooking on top of a moving target. The humidity is quite different, and the products that they're going to get are quite different because they're having to source this from other places. They're having to store things in volume, and they're having to mass produce. And for the most part, I think they were doing a really nice job with what they were given. Now, they do have the option of a Carnival deli that doesn't cost any extra money and is also included in that all-inclusive price. The Carnival deli offers about 5 or 6 cold and hot options, including things like a Philly cheesesteak, a Reuben, grilled cheese, a hot ham and cheese, veggie burger, and a buffalo chicken sandwich. I think over the time of all the cruises that I've been on, I've probably tried every item on this list. Nothing really to write home about, but also nothing disappointing. Like, you know what you're getting, and it is what it is. But my favorite item that I had a couple of while I was on this cruise was their turkey sandwich with mustard on a pretzel bun. I'm a huge fan of a pretzel bun, and this was really nice, fresh deli carved turkey piled high with lettuce and tomato, bacon, and a little bit of mustard. You really can't beat it. It comes with French fries. The French fries were always hot and fresh. I've never had a bad experience with the Carnival Deli. Now, on Friday night for dinner, I made a specialty dining reservation. This actually cost extra, so it cost $18 to dine at Cucina del Capitano. That's Italian for the captain's kitchen. So if you've ever been on a Carnival cruise, you understand that the ships are built in Italy and the captains are typically Italian. And so that's kind of the idea here, is that they took all of the captains from various Carnival ships and they wanted to cook their childhood favorites in an elegant and upscale setting. The idea is that you pay $18 for a prefix menu, which means you choose obviously a first course, a second course, and then a dessert. In this restaurant, the service was absolutely fantastic. I ate there twice actually through the duration of the cruise. The first time I went for the first course, I got cozze e vongole, which is clams and mussels. So these come with pancetta sofrito. So a little lesson time. Sofrito in Spanish cooking, typically, but also in Italian cooking, is going to be a mixture of sometimes onion, carrot, tomato, sometimes onion, celery, tomato, sometimes just onions and herbs. But the idea is that it's kind of the base for your dish, and you cook the sofrito as a base for sauce or like another sauteed item, or specifically a paella. It's kind of like the Trinity in Cajun cooking, or mirepoix in French cooking. So the Trinity being onion, celery, and green bell pepper, and sometimes garlic. And then the mirepoix in French cooking being onion, celery, and carrot. It's often the flavor base for a lot of sauces and dishes. So the sofrito in this was onion and a little bit tomato, and there was a little celery as well. There were fennel fronds used as a garnish, which I really dig a lot. It took a long time for me to like fennel, but one of the things I really enjoy about a garnish is if it's creative and it also prevents waste. So usually you throw the tops of the fennel away. I think there's a lot of bright green, fresh flavor there. And they're really good as a garnish or on top of soup and stews and in cold salads. So I love when people are using the extras and bits and pieces and odds and ends. It had a little sherry in there, and then it had these crispy pieces of pancetta, which were outstanding, and it was drizzled with extra virgin olive oil. I was really surprised at the amount of flavor in the broth. I like to take whatever bread is at the table and use it to sop up the broth that's in a clam and mussel dish. I did get one mussel that was a little bit gritty. Didn't seem like it opened that well, or might have just had a little bit of grit in it. But overall, I would give this dish 4 out of 5, just for the outstanding flavor that was in the broth itself. Sometimes it can be lacking a little bit of salt, and this was right on the money, and it had a really nice balance of acid, and then the fat from the pancetta. So I was really pleasantly surprised by this. For the second course, I chose the porcini rubbed beef short rib. So the porcini rubbed beef short rib came with salsa verde. So in this case, I don't want you to think salsa verde like the green salsa that you would get with Mexican food or New Mexican food. Salsa verde in this case is really closer to a pesto or a chimichurri, except that this one was more raw. It seemed like its base was maybe a little bit of arugula and spinach, but it worked really well in this dish with that. You needed that green brightness to kind of balance out the richness of this porcini rubbed beef short rib. The beef short rib was fork tender and absolutely incredible. The side items that they had on offering were fingerling potatoes, spaghetti, roasted broccoli and cauliflower, lentils with marinated broccoli rabe, and then they had a Romana style gnocchi. So gnocchi are like these little pillowy pockets of pasta made with cooked potatoes and sometimes herbs, but typically just really simple, like cooked potatoes, flour, and a little bit of egg. And you make these tiny little soft dumplings. You boil them and then maybe you cook them down with like butter or brown butter or oil afterwards. Well, in the Romana style, these are more of a puck. They look like a little croquette, and they're browned in clarified butter on both sides, and then they have like a little crispy crust of they're set down in like Parmesan cheese, and they get like this little crust. It's kind of like when you're making grilled cheese and the cheese oozes out and hits the butter in the pan, and it makes that little crown of like crunchy web-like cheesy goodness, which is also my favorite part. Well, this was 3 giant gnocchi that were crusted with this crispy Parmesan cheese. They were spectacular. I would have eaten an entire plate of those on their own. The entire dinner was really amazing. For dessert, I had one of the most inventive desserts that I've ever had on a Carnival cruise ship. Now, in the sit-down dining rooms, they do have stuff that's the same from ship to ship, right? Like if you want a lighter selection, consider this, right? Like if it's a non-American taking the cruise, there's a couple of things they might be accustomed to for dessert in their country that might seem very different to us. A lot of times an after meal cheese selection is considered kind of, what you do instead of something sweet. Or if you want to go for the lighter side, they have a selection of sorbets. They might have just a little bit of fruit, but like, hey, you heard it from me. Fruit is not dessert. I'm sorry, but it's not. That's a horrible, horrible myth and a lie. Fruit does not count as dessert. I'm just going to say it. That's fine. You can be mad. I don't care. It's my opinion. Opinions aren't right or wrong, and food is really relative, and we all have opinions, and that's great. But like, in my opinion, no, fruit as a dessert is a ripoff. I digress. So one of the things that people really love who've been on Carnival cruises is the Carnival melting cake. To me, because I've seen so many chocolate molten cakes on menus, I've had to make them, produce them for banquets and everything else. I am just not even excited about chocolate molten cake. Have I had it on Carnival? Yes, I had it on the Ecstasy. It's fine, but I also feel like if you've had the molten cake at Chili's, you've kind of had the experience. I mean, you're not looking at the ocean while you're eating it. Obviously, you're not on vacation, but and hey, if you want to eat at Chili's while you're on vacation, like you do you, boo. But I don't know. It just doesn't do anything for me. Now, one of the things I really like in a dessert is when somebody has combined a savory and a sweet element in a way that you haven't considered. I absolutely love that kind of out of the box thinking. So one of the items that I had on this first visit to Cucina del Capitano was a hand-ground polenta cake. So polenta is a more coarse version of cornmeal. Think of it as Italian grits, right? A hand-ground polenta cake. So this was a sweet version of cornbread in other words, with a citrus custard cream, and it was served with lemon sorbet. So not only was the presentation beautiful, the lemon sorbet came in a tiny shot glass, and it was a little quenelle. A quenelle, while we're on the topic, is a 3-sided football shape. The best way I can explain this to you is it kind of looks like an egg, but you're creating it with a creamy substance. So you heat 2 spoons and gently roll them back and forth off of each other, and it makes this quenelle. You can do it with ice cream. You can do it with whipped cream. In this case, it was sorbet. It was absolutely gorgeous. There were little edible flowers on the plate. The citrus custard cream wasn't too citrusy. It was more on the rich side. I believe the citrus that was in it was orange from what I could tell. And it might have been a little bit of liqueur influence as well. But there was the lemon sorbet was super sour and bright and acidic. The polenta cake was not overly sweet. It had a good amount of olive oil in it, which played really well against the acid in the sorbet. And then the cream was kind of the foil between the two. And it was awesome. I was just like, yes, because to be honest, I was really expecting like kind of the run of the mill Italian desserts are really well known to Americans, right? Or at least tourists. It's like tiramisu and, even American Italian food, right? Like spumoni, or I was like, maybe they're going to have some sort of chocolate cake or they might have cheesecake, but no, they really impressed me in this area. The other choices were a sea salt chocolate cookie sandwich with piped in coffee mousse, orange financier, which financier cake is like a French style ground pistachio cake. It's extremely rich. It's really, really good. And then it had coffee gelato. And then the other option was a buttery pie crust with Chardonnay stewed apples served with crunchy almond and caramel ice cream. So kind of like an inverted apple tart. I just really, if I have some choices on a menu, apple's just not my first choice. It's just not. I'm always going to go for something that has coffee in it, or I'm always going to go for something that's very, very interesting. And so with these being my 3 choices, I automatically knew what I was going to do. So on the first visit, I had the polenta cake. It did not disappoint. And on the second visit, I had the chocolate cookie sandwich. Now, when they say cookie and cookie sandwich, we're not talking about an Oreo here. We're talking about 2 gorgeous dark chocolate pieces of biscotti with a light sprinkling of sea salt, and it had coffee cream in it. I really think there was a mascarpone component to this, or maybe a ricotta or creme fraiche. That is to say, this wasn't really sweet like whipped cream. This was very, very rich and very, very savory. The coffee played really well with the chocolate and the salt, and the financier was beautiful. And then throw in the coffee gelato, and it was absolutely over the top. So that was Friday night. Saturday night, I returned, was also able to get a reservation again for this restaurant because it was exactly what I wanted. The second time around, I had Nana's meatball. So it's handmade with olive oil, sauteed garlic and onion, baked with fresh mozzarella, and served over the Captain's Secret tomato sauce. Once again, a meatball, nothing crazy, but I always love to try a meatball from whatever Italian restaurant because I really feel like you could learn a lot about the quality of the other food. This was spectacular. It didn't have too much breadcrumbs. It was loose, loose enough to where it wasn't like a compacted rock, but, it was still held together really nicely. It had a lot of fresh herbs in it and a lot of really, really nice onion and garlic flavor, and the texture was really great. I liked it. I liked it a lot. On Saturday night, the second course that I had was a crusted bronzino. It was almond crusted filet. There's that word again. They were calling the sea bass. I mean, it's not sea bass, so you can just say that it's bronzino again in the description. I digress. It came on stewed chickpeas, and it came with a butter and lemon sauce. It was a really simple preparation, but done really well. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the paid dining experiences on Carnival is that they really elevate them. They really do go out of their way to make sure that the food's done well. And I really appreciated that. On this evening, I had the fingerling potatoes, which are, small potatoes. They come in purple and red and yellow and white. Preparation was burnt butter and rosemary, which was fantastic. There are a couple different kinds of butter that are used for everything from finishing off a dish or, cooking a main item or cooking a side item. So I'll take a little bit of a break to talk about that. So first, you can use butter just whole, right? You could be cooking some onions in it or using it to grease a casserole dish, grease a cake pan. You could be using it to saute vegetables on the stovetop. There's a high likelihood that it will burn, but when you heat butter high enough, it does separate into its components, which is the whey or the milk solids, and then only the fat, which you might hear called clarified butter or ghee. And then in several different kinds of cooking, right? French, Spanish, Italian, and even some American, but mostly American food is taking its cues, right, from these classical cooking techniques and building upon them. You'll find different colors of butter mentioned. So when you cook butter low and slow until the fat separates, those milk solids will start to caramelize and they'll develop flavors of their own. One of the things that's really good about brown butter is that it lends this nutty, brown, almost burnt but not quite flavor to things like gnocchi, for example, or pasta. Brown butter and sage is a really classic combination that people use as a sauce all on its own for things like ravioli. Or brown butter is especially good in cookie dough. It gives a richness and a flavor and a different, taste component to things like a classic chocolate chip cookie. Brown butter also plays well wherever, cinnamon and brown sugar would play well. So brown butter works really well in things like banana bread or butterscotch blondies and things like that. So these fingerling potatoes were said to have been cooked in burnt butter. That would be beurre noisette or beurre noir. Beurre noisette is the French that refers to brown butter, which is a light caramely color. And then beurre noir is one step past that. It gets a completely different flavor when you actually burn it. And once you've burnt it, you really can't use it to cook in, but it's more of a finishing. So my theory is that these potatoes were blanched and then shocked, or parboiled and then shocked. Then they were tossed in a fat that would not burn for a long-term cooking process, like probably olive oil. They were cut in half with the skins on, roasted and extremely brown, really well caramelized and very well seasoned, crispy skin on the outside and really fluffy baked potato type, texture on the inside, but they were drizzled with this burnt butter, which made for a really interesting combination with the rosemary. I think they could have opened the rosemary flavor up just a little bit by cooking it in the butter. But if you've ever burnt rosemary, it's a flavor that you'll never forget, much like burning chocolate or burning garlic. So I understand why they didn't run the risk, but I think they could have, possibly let the rosemary sit a little bit in the dish before it was plated, just to get some of those essential oils and that flavor into there. It seemed like the rosemary was just kind of more sprinkled on top. So really, that's my only qualm there. Both meals were absolutely fantastic. Now on Sunday night, I went to the steakhouse on board. That's another additional cost reservation that you could make. This was Fahrenheit 555. So they have a variety of steaks available in all sort of different cuts. They have a really, really nice selection of starters. The wine list was really impressive. I didn't partake in any wine on this cruise, but they always have really impressive selections. So at Fahrenheit 555 Steakhouse, it costs $35 per person. And it's the same kind of deal. It's a prefixed menu where you'll choose a starter, an entree, and a dessert. The starter options were iced and smoked fresh oysters, stuffed mushrooms, beef carpaccio, heritage Berkshire pork belly, or jumbo shrimp cocktail. I guess I was just in the mood for shrimp cocktail, and I happened to order it again. These were fantastic. The shrimp were cooked perfectly. They had a lot of flavor. Typically, I always have a little bit of bad luck when it comes to shrimp or crab or lobster out in the wild. That is to say, outside of my house that I didn't cook myself. I always seem to get a little bit of the shell. I'm not quite sure what happens there. I guess I'm just lucky. But this time, no such thing happened. Beautiful shrimp cocktail. Really, really nice presentation on top of crushed ice. They had a little bit of remoulade sauce that was available. It was spicy. It had a lot of caper action going on in there. It was great. The cocktail sauce was the same one that they used in the Sapphire Dining Room. I could tell. Still really nice with the additional fresh horseradish grated on top. The iced and smoked fresh oysters were intriguing to me. They came with butter and mace, which is kind of like it's the that outer portion of nutmeg, and it's a very spicy, type of spice. You might see it included in things like apple pie spice or gingerbread sometimes. So I thought that was a really interesting flavor to put with a melted butter for oysters. It also came with an apple mignonette, which is kind of like a vinaigrette with tiny little onions in it. But you can jazz a mignonette up a lot by adding things like jalapeno or apple or fresh horseradish or things like that. It was probably very good. It's just that I don't eat oysters very often. And then the stuffed mushrooms, I saw the table next to me had them, and to be honest, they looked a little bit dry. So I think I made the right decision. And then I kind of have a huge problem with going to a steakhouse to order a steak and then getting beef carpaccio as a first course, because it's like, well, here's some cold beef and you'll eat some hot beef. And I'm like, nah, I need a little bit of variety in my meal. Also, first course options they had were a baked onion soup. So traditional French onion soup. It had Gruyere and Swiss, which I found redundant to be listed on the menu because Gruyere is a type of Swiss. I would say it's the king of Swiss cheeses. Maybe Emmentaler from Switzerland, but Gruyere is the French equivalent. But yeah, Gruyere and Swiss melt, so they could have just been like Swiss and Swiss are both on top. But I'm nitpicking here. It had a sourdough crouton. I saw it on the table to my left. It looked really nice, but to be honest, it was 92 degrees outside with no clouds and no wind, and I just wasn't in the mood for soup. They had the same classic Caesar salad. Didn't look a lot different from the one that was in the Sapphire Dining Room, to be honest, and I just wasn't in the mood to have it again. They had a baby leaf spinach and fresh mushroom salad, like a really traditional preparation, right? With just the warm bacon dressing, blue cheese crumbles, and sliced raw mushrooms. I think it's always a great pick. They also had a wedge salad on the menu. But to be honest, I'd had the ranch dressing on Carnival before. It's not my favorite. It just kind of tastes super mass produced. It's really not a dig at Carnival. When you're feeding that many people, you've got to do what you got to do. So I totally get it. But hey, I'm making my own adventure here, and if I don't want ranch to be in my adventure, then here we are. Okay, for the entrees, they offered a prime New York strip, a grilled prime cowboy steak. So that's the cowboy ribeye, and it has like the bone out of one side. They had a spice rubbed prime ribeye steak. That was more of a blackened type presentation. They had a broiled lobster tail. They had a pan-seared rosemary chicken. They had grilled lamb chops. They had a selection of market fish. They had a filet mignon, and they also had a surf and turf, which was just a smaller filet with a main lobster tail. Once again, neither one of these fillets was wrapped in bacon, so they should have just called it beef tenderloin or filet instead of mignon, but I'll get over it. For the side dishes, they had baked potatoes with all the trimmings. They had creamed spinach with garlic, steamed broccoli, vegetable medley, and a mushroom medley. I always get creamed spinach at a steakhouse. It just feels right. This did not disappoint. It was very good. I got the spice rubbed ribeye steak, but I requested it without the spice. Yes, I am that person. Ribeye is one of my favorite steaks beside hanger steak, and I just wanted it with salt and pepper. They said it was no problem. I've always encountered incredible service in the sit-down restaurants on Carnival cruise ships. This time was no different. This experience was excellent, and I could not eat an 18-ounce steak, so I actually took it with me and put it in the refrigerator in my stateroom and took it with me to the buffet the next day and added it to a taco. I know. Why on vacation would you eat leftovers? But, it just seemed like, well, I paid extra money for this, and I kind of want to see it through to the end. It was fantastic. It was cooked perfectly. It did not disappoint. Now, one of the things that was a little bit interesting about the ship is that almost at every single bar I went to, every cocktail I ordered was made incorrectly. This was, it's really not the bummer that I'm making it out to be. It was more funny than anything else. And it just kind of makes you realize that when you live in one spot and you go to places where people know what you like and how you like it, it just kind of goes to show how our experiences are so much different from somebody else's. Our perspectives are so much different from everybody else's, right? And there were a couple things that kind of blew my mind that I was like, wow, people just have no idea. Now, well, when I was on the ship, I had a cold, and so it was a little bit of a bummer. Luckily, it didn't affect my taste, and I'm really not one of those people that's ever lost my appetite while I've been sick. And so that was a real blessing. But one of the things that I did attempt to order was a hot toddy. Nobody knew what that was. And so I would go to the buffet. I would get hot water and lemon from the coffee and tea section, which are self-serve. I would take it to the bar and ask for a shot of whiskey to be added to it. And it was absolutely mind-blowing to them that I would want that in hot water and lemon. But it seemingly did the trick. I mean, it wasn't a cure-all, but it does make your throat feel better if you have a sore throat or you feel a cold coming on. Another drink that I'm a big fan of is a Negroni, which is equal parts sweet vermouth, Campari, which is an Italian aperitif, and gin. And typically the garnish for this drink is an orange slice, but I received it with both a cucumber at one bar and a cherry in another. And then I got a couple of, we don't know how to make that, or we don't carry that, like they thought it was a product. So it was a couple of interesting experiences. Like, hey, at the end of the day, I wasn't paying for anything. And, it's like, you can't be mad about it, but it just kind of made me laugh. And especially when I'm looking over the guy's shoulder at the bar selection, I'm looking at the bottles and going like, you have everything right there. I could literally teach you how to do it. And then at one point I went to the Red Frog rum bar, which is up on the Lido deck near the pool. Most Carnival ships have these. They usually also have like a pub of the same name that's more interior in the ship that usually has like a karaoke bar. They might have like a little acoustic set. But it's inside, in other words. But up on the deck, they'll have all sort of island themed, obviously, and ocean themed drinks, and all your strawberry daiquiris and pina coladas and beachcombers and Bahama Mamas and all the like, right? Anything that you might expect to find at a beach bar. But he had every component behind it to make it. When I asked him for this drink, I could tell it was off to a bad start because he was on his phone looking it up. And I'm not quite sure what he Googled, but it was nothing close to a Negroni. So all that being said, take the good and the bad, take it instead. When you're on vacation, you just realize that it's different strokes for different folks, right? And everybody's going to find things that they like, and everybody's going to have not so stellar experiences. But, I always use traveling or a vacation, just, besides relaxing, I always just use it as an opportunity to expand my horizons and try different things. Now, for lunch on Saturday, I went to the buffet. The fun thing about the Carnival ship is that you're going to be able to see, if you pay attention closely, how they're repurposing food. They are absolutely using leftovers and cross-utilizing items between sit-down dining options, counter dining options, and the buffet. So, for example, there was carbonara on Saturday on the buffet. It was done quite well. It was really an Americanized version. There's a little bit heavy cream in there. It's not necessary, but hey, it was delicious. In this instance, it was peas and bacon and spinach. And it looked like a little bit of pancetta, some heavy cream, loads of butter, tons of Parmesan cheese. By this point, it was almost an Alfredo, but it was very good. It had a couple of poached eggs on top for good measure, even in the pan on the buffet, and it was with linguine noodles. They had a similar carbonara dish on the dinner menu in Sapphire Dining on the day previous. So I totally get what they're going for there. And additionally, if it's elegant night on a cruise and you feel like, you don't want to get dressed up, elegant night they kind of have a different dress code depending on how long the cruise is and what day of the cruise it is. It might be casual or elegant. That's where you see people break out everything from tuxedos to ball gowns to evening wear to cocktail wear and everything else. And usually in the sit-down restaurant, they will serve something a little bit nicer on elegant night. They'll have a little bit nicer food. They'll have a little bit more elegant fare. They might have prime rib or some steak available that they typically don't have other nights. They're going to have a little bit nicer starters and, desserts as well. Well, on this particular cruise, I did not attend Elegant Night in the regular dining room, but they had on the buffet, right around between lunch and dinner, they had some different iterations of the same items. So, for instance, when the dining room would have prime rib, the buffet would have like sliced roast beef. It was probably just the other end of, the rib roast, to be honest. It didn't really look all that much different, except that you couldn't specify a temperature. Now, they had a steamship round one night, like a carved beef station, which was really nice. Frequently during the day, during lunch or dinner, they would have a lot of the same items, just kind of repurposed. And to be honest, like there really wasn't really anything I didn't enjoy from the buffet the few times that I frequented it. Now, they have a little section on the Carnival sit-down menus called Rare Finds, where they are claiming that they're going to give you the chance to try something you've always wanted to try. Well, I've taken advantage of these opportunities quite a few times over the years. One of the recurring items and things that I think they do really well in this section of the menu is their frog legs. Now, I've had deep fried frog legs several times, and if you're making faces or clutching pearls or absolutely beside yourself about frog legs, just remember, for all intents and purposes, it's a fish with legs. Okay, so if you're eating shrimp, if you're eating lobster, it's basically the cockroaches of the ocean. So get down off your high horse. It's going to be okay. Frog legs are absolutely delicious. They don't taste like frog, whatever you think that might taste like, right? Like, who really knows? They definitely don't taste like chicken. They do mimic the texture of dark meat chicken, I feel, but they're very, very tender. If anything, I would say that frog legs are much closer to rabbit, to be honest. But they don't taste fishy at all. I think they have a wonderful texture, and when cooked right, are really delicious. So I've had them deep fried in a couple of different preparations, more of a Cajun style, definitely like chicken fried, and then a cornmeal breading. But in this instance, they were more Provençal style in a white wine sauce with garlic and tomato, and these things were amazing, so much so that I had 2 orders. I absolutely love frog legs. There was tons of butter, tons of garlic, and that's really key, just like when you're cooking escargot or snails. So I had wonderful meals all throughout my cruise. If you've ever been curious about taking a cruise, so if you've never been on a cruise before and you've read all the bad things about how terrible the food is, don't believe everything you read. Take it from me. Now, with Carnival being among one of the most, cheapest and most affordable cruise lines, I've been really impressed by the quality of the food that I've eaten on these cruises over the years. I can't wait to try a different cruise line like Royal Caribbean or Disney, and I bet the food experiences are even better, but you should be encouraged by this. Even on the most affordable cruise line, the food was really well thought out, and the quality is really, really good for, it's a really good value for the money that you're paying, I believe. So anyway, that's just a recap of all the things that I got to eat while I was on the Carnival Breeze. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget about our June promotion. We are attempting to fight hunger wherever you live, not just here in Dallas, where I record this podcast, but wherever you may be listening from. So far, the highest donation has been given is $40. So I will be matching that donation of $40 to our own North Texas Food Bank at the end of this month. The person who donates the most to a food charity of their choice and sends us a screenshot will receive a box full of the Food for Thoughtcast swag, a couple of assorted food items, and not to mention a signed copy of Get You Grub On, a wonderful cookbook that was written by a fantastic friend of the show and frequent guest, Chef Steven Gonzalez. I know he can't wait to make it out to whoever the winner is of this contest and get it in your hands. So don't forget, just use feedingamerica.org to determine which food banks and charities operate in your state, or you can pick your favorite local food bank or charity. It could even be a food pantry, a local can drive, or a church food bank. And be sure to just pay it forward and spread that love if you are able. If not, try donating your time, which is also a wonderful alternative. I'm sure that any organization out there would be glad to have you doing whatever you can to help their cause. If you've never been on a cruise before and you're curious about the food, or if you've always wanted to try a certain food on a Carnival cruise that you haven't tried before, I hope this gives you some new ideas and a little bit of insight into how chefs eat while they're on vacation. To be quite honest, I just eat and eat and eat some more. And then I go to sleep and eat a little bit more. Eating is part of my recreation when I'm traveling. So it might look a little bit different to everybody else, but I hope you enjoyed.
That's a wrap for today. Until the next episode of the Food for Thoughtcast, make good food, eat good food, share it, and be kind to one another.
Thanks so much for listening today. You are part of what makes us special, and we are so glad you joined us. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and leave a review. Just like food, delicious podcasts are better when you share them with others. Come back for seconds wherever podcasts are served, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Food for Thoughtcast.
You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at the Food for Thoughtcast or at www.foodforthoughtcast.com, where you can link to all podcast players, or you can send us an email at foodforthoughtcmc@gmail.com.